I step off my jet with a $5 billion deal on my calendar, and I see my ex-wife in the terminal holding the hands of two little boys with my exact green eyes. I stop breathing. If it were you, would you walk to the boardroom or walk to them? My name is Marcus Reynolds. I build towers for a living, glass and steel, that eat the sun for breakfast. But that morning at JFK, I was a man in an expensive suit who forgot how to move. 20 minutes earlier, I was in the jet's bathroom, tightening a silk tie, rehearsing a few bullet points about cap rates and zoning variances. On paper, I was the guy with his name in metal letters on rooftops. In the mirror, I saw a face I recognized but didn't trust. You know what I mean. The look you get when success is wearing you like a costume. "Sir, wheels down in 20, Sarah called through the door, voice crisp the way good assistants sound when your life is a fire drill. Harrison countered. "Board at 11, investors at 1. I said got it, thanks, and meant it. And then I looked through the glass to the main terminal and saw Christina with the boys. She was standing where all the regular travelers stand, under those flickering gate numbers, and the smell of coffee, wearing a simple sundress and a tote bag that had seen better days. I have known models, socialites, CEOs with stylists who earn more than some small towns, and none of them ever touched me the way Christina does when she's just being Christina. Her hair in twists now framed a face that looked tired and lit from inside at the same time. She shifted her weight, squeezed two tiny hands, and turned toward the window. The boys followed her gaze. They looked at me. No, they looked at a stranger. But their eyes were mine. My knees did that invisible buckle, the kind you hide because men like me learn to make collapse look like a stretch. Sarah tugged my sleeve. "Sir, the car." I heard my own voice from far away. "Cancel the meeting." She blinked. "Sir, that meeting decides the deal. Cancel everything." And I walked not fast, more like gravity had hooked me by the heart, Art, and was reeling me in. "Christina," I said. It came out louder than I meant. She froze like I'd called out at a high school gym. She turned. Those eyes I used to wake up to now, careful. "Hello, Marcus." There's a script for a moment like that in movies. Real life doesn't give you that script. You get one breath, two boys, and a question you can't answer. Were you ever going to tell me I was looking at the boys when I asked, because I couldn't not? One of them tugged her dress. "Mommy, who's that man?" If you ever meet your child like a stranger in an airport, you learn how a sentence can be both soft and a knife. That was the sharpest cut of my life. We ended up in one of those terminal restaurants that pretend to be a sports bar, sticky menus, and too much ketchup. The boys wanted ice cream, probably because it was lunchtime, and we were all pretending we weren't shaking. I sat across from them and learned their names like I was being introduced to a piece of myself I'd lost in a move. Mike, the plane watcher with that bobblehead curiosity. MJ, the one who furrowed his brow exactly like I do when I'm measuring a room in my head. "Can I sit with you?" I asked. Christina nodded, but her jaw had that small, clenched place where mothers hold the world together. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I almost told you 100 times. Your mother at the gala. The way the room looked at me. Then bed rest. And I was scared." Pattern interrupt, hold this. We will come back to that gala. We will come back to my mother. For now, it's just a table, 2 spoons, and the sound your heart makes when you realize you missed first words and first steps because you were busy winning. "You like planes?" I asked Mike because I needed to say something that didn't shake. "I love them," he said, eyes big, mouth full. "I'm going to be a pilot." MJ laughed. "No way we're going to build the tallest building in the world. Taller than Daddy's." I swallowed hard. Is that right? I said, and felt my life rearrange itself. My phone kept vibrating like a wasp in a drawer. Sarah, the board, the market. Harrison, the competitor who smiles like he's saying grace just before he eats you. If you ever needed proof that sharks can smell blood across town, try missing a meeting to have ice cream with your sons for the first time. Do you think that's fair? That the world puts price tags on moments like that? We walked to the curb together. The boys climbed into their booster seats, not because I told them to, but because Christina had built a world where rules felt like love, not control. Their little hands waved through tinted glass. I stood on the sidewalk like I was 12 and had just watched my mom drive away after a summer visit. It's funny how memory and present time braid together when you're not ready. The next morning, I drove to Christina's brownstone in Brooklyn. The door had a hand-painted welcome sign in blue, probably tiny fingerprints on it if you looked close. There were flowers in the window boxes and chalk lines on the stoop. The door opened before I could knock. A neighbor with kind eyes and a tray of cookies. "I'm Mrs. Johnson," she said. "I help with the boys sometimes. You want to know why neighborhoods survive rich men's plans? It's because of people like her." Inside her living room was a gallery of the years I missed. First birthday with a lopsided cake. First day of preschool with ties tied halfway. Tiny soccer cleats by the door. I walked through, and those frames punched me in the ribs, one by one, the way truth does when it shows up without PR. "They're happy," Christina said, arms crossed, voice soft and flinty. "They're loved." "They're loved without their father," I answered. My voice cracked around the edges. The type of break you can't sand and stain like a hardwood floor. You need to hear the part about the gala, because it's a hinge. My mother's charity events are where privilege drinks champagne and calls it generosity. Christina had her hand in mine that night, and a secret in her eyes that glow new. Mothers get that lights up a dark room. I went to shake hands, make a speech, do the sun routine, and I heard it. My mother's voice clear as a bell and twice as cutting, telling her friends she was relieved we hadn't gotten pregnant because the family isn't ready for mixed-race grandchildren. She said it like she was discussing linen. Look, my mother is not a cartoon villain. She is a woman raised in rooms that trained her to mistake comfort for correctness. She said what that room taught her to say, and something in Christina shut like a door in the wind. She went to Atlanta. Bed rest. Complications. She almost called, she said, then saw a photo of me in the paper with my mother at another gala and decided to protect 2 small heartbeats from a world that had already made up its mind about them. If it were you, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments, because years later, I still turn that night over in my hands, like a coin, front, back, both sides, smooth and ugly. The story found headlines because money makes a certain kind of noise, and people listen for it like it's music. "Reynolds's hidden heirs," the tabloids screamed. My mother burst into my office, holding the paper like a smoking gun. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, like motherhood is a press release. "Because I just found out too," I said, staring at the photo I'd taken at the airport of Mike's grin smeared in chocolate. "We need DNA tests," she snapped. "No," I said, "I don't need paper to recognize my eyes." She narrowed hers. "The board does," and there it was. The machine. Markets. Meetings. Men with opinions about other people's children. Harrison called 3 directors before lunch, told them I was distracted, told them volatility makes money nervous. He wasn't wrong about volatility. He was wrong about what causes it. The next week, Mike had a school play. He was a tiger. Christina texted, "You don't have to come. They won't notice the kind of self-protection you learn when you've waited in lobbies for people who said they'd be there. I showed up in the front row like a man who didn't care if the board called during the opening number. Mom sat beside me in a dress that cost more than the theater's light rig. "Darling, the investors from Shanghai need FaceTime." "So does my son," I said, eyes on the curtain. She pursed her lips. "Optics matter." "So do promises," I whispered. The lights went down. Mike walked out with whiskers painted crooked and shoulders squared like a tiny general. When he spotted me, his face changed shape like sunlight learned to smile. He roared. It was terrible and perfect. After the show, he ran at me. "Daddy, did you see when I scared the hunter?" I fixed his crooked whiskers with my thumb and told him the truth. "Scariest hunter I've ever seen. You know that feeling where your chest hurts because it's too full?" "Yeah, that happened." My phone buzzed. "Sarah, emergency board meeting. Harrison moved for a vote. They're on the line." I looked at Christina at MJ tracing the frosting on a cookie and made a decision I regret. I left early. I told myself I had to fight for our financial oxygen. Maybe that was true. It didn't make sense to a 4-year-old. It still doesn't to me in the part of my life that matters. Boardroom. Long table that has seen 100 men pretend not to be afraid. Harrison had his calm face on the one that sells poison like tea. He talked about missed meetings and leadership continuity. He slid numbers across the table like playing cards. I let him finish. "Let me be clear," I said when it was my turn. "Those boys are my sons. We'll do your tests so you can stop pretending science is the same thing as a soul. And I will be both CEO and father." Harrison smiled. "The market prefers undivided attention. Pattern-interrupt markets are not God. Markets are a scoreboard. They don't tell you if you played the right game. We did the DNA test. Chain of custody. Gloves. Swabs. A technician who tried not to look like she was making history. I didn't open the envelope for 3 days because my chest had already opened to the only result that mattered. When I finally tore it, my mother walked in with a lawyer. 99.9, I said. She exhaled like she'd been inconvenienced and turned to the lawyer. "Good. Now custody." "Excuse me," I said, very calm. "Custody." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Given your resources, Mr. Reynolds, and the mother's situation, we believe primary custody could be framed as..." "Get out," I said. "Both of you." When you say "get out" to your mother and a lawyer in your own office, a younger you in your head flinches. The older you makes space for the things you should have said years ago. I drove to Brooklyn. Christina was on the stoop, crying into her hands. A reporter tried to get into their classroom, she said. The principal had to call security. I sat down beside her. You ever see the world you built start to look like a cage you need to dismantle with your bare hands? That was me on those steps. "I'll handle it," I said, meaning it in a way I hadn't always. "I got a job offer in California," she said. "Art program director. Quiet town." I was going to say no, now I don't know. "You're not taking them away," I said. "Not a threat, a fear." "I'm protecting them," she said. We were about to say more when a crash and a high cry from inside cut the argument in half. MJ on the floor, arm wrong. The emergency room lights felt like interrogation. Paparazzi outside. I called security. I called my attorney. I called the part of me that has always been good at war and told him to wake up. The doctor said sprain, not break, and my legs almost went out from under me. I walked into the hall and called Mr. Chen in Beijing. "We're restructuring," I said. "We're moving west." If the storm won't stop, we change coasts. That night at Christina's kitchen table after the boys were asleep, I told her everything I planned to do. You'd give up New York. She asked for us. I'd give up everything that isn't you, I said. And for once, it wasn't a line, it was logistics. 2 weeks later, the ocean was in our windows. The Malibu house was one of those places people take pictures of from the beach. But to me, it was a chance to build a different life. The twins ran from room to room, hollering about dolphins. Our neighbor Thomas jogged by with 2 dogs, Zeus and Apollo, who promptly fired my heart with the idea that boys and dogs belong together like peanut butter and jelly. Thomas turned out to be a pediatrician, the calm voice you want in a storm. We hired Sophia, a former Olympic swimmer, to teach the boys the water. Christina started at the art school, came home smelling like tempera paint and hope. I carved big white spaces into my calendar, bigger than I'd ever allowed. I stood in the yard at dusk with a garden hose like a normal dad, and let the salt air explain a few things I'd refused to hear. Then the twist. Morning headline: DNA tests compromised. Insider says tech bribed. Harrison's fingerprints all over it. He demanded a new test court supervision, a hearing to determine best interests of the minors. Do you think that's fair? That the legal system can be used as a megaphone for malice if you've got enough money and a grudge? We fought back. My lawyer David started the paper chase. My mother made phone calls to people who make other people answer on the first ring. The boys ate cereal and argued about whether penguins are birds, like the universe was reminding me there are still simple things that matter. School drop-off turned into a gauntlet. Cameras. Questions barked at 4-year-olds. Mike cried. MJ tried to be brave, which is a thing he thinks is his job because he has my face. Thomas showed up in his white coat, stood in the doorway, and told grown adults with microphones to back up, or he'd have them charged with harassing minors. The principal posted a no-media policy that read like a restraining order. We came home and Sophia had the boys float on their backs while the sky did that California blue. Trust the water, she said. It will hold you if you let it. I tucked that sentence into my pocket. The board called an emergency session in New York. I promised the boys I'd be back for their school play. I mean it when I tell you, if you promise a child something, make it true or don't say it. My mother flew with me. We walked into that cold room together like 2 people who have finally agreed on the same target. Harrison stood at the head of the table, smiling and spreading papers. The technician was bribed, he announced. These results are suspect. He paused just long enough to let that word do its work. Suspect. He laid a photo on the table. And this, Mrs. Taylor entering another lab 2 weeks earlier. Before I could answer, the doors opened. Claire walked in. Harrison's daughter. She looked like someone who'd run through a house with the lights off for a long time and finally turned them on. Thomas followed, holding a folder. The technician was on maternity leave, he said, voice even. Not in the building. This allegation is manufactured. Claire spoke up. He threatened me, she said, and the room shifted a degree. He said he'd ruin my husband's career if I didn't back him up. I can't do this anymore. Harrison flushed. Family business is complicated, he tried. No, Claire said. This is simple. I looked around that table at men who measured their lives in quarterly increments. And I realized something that seems obvious now. I no longer cared if they thought I was strong. I cared if my sons knew I chose them when choosing cost me something. You can have it, I said. The room stopped. You can have the company, my shares, the thing you think is my name, with conditions. You sign a document that says you will never again contest my children's paternity. You apologize to Christina and to my sons on the record, and you fix things with your daughter in a way that doesn't involve lawyers or lighting for cameras. My mother stood. I support my son's decision. Our vote with Chen Capital controls the room. Harrison sputtered, then smiled like he thought he'd won. Maybe he believed he had. People who worship the scoreboard forget to look at the field. I checked my watch. If I left, then I could make a plane and a promise. Paper it, I said, and walked out into the hallway feeling 15 pounds lighter and 20 years older and exactly my age for the first time in months. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. I made it. I ran into the school auditorium while the principal was still giving the safety briefing. Christina stood in the aisle with her hands at her chest, tears in her eyes, not because I was back from New York, but because Mike was peeking through the backstage curtain and saw his dad. I knelt and straightened MJ's cape, then looked him in the eye. You ready, buddy? He nodded solemn like a judge. I promised, I said I keep promises. The play was chaotic and holy. Mike roared. The crowd laughed. MJ saved the day with a plastic sword and a look that said, he's been saving me for weeks. After in a hallway smelling like crayons and juice, I took out a ring I'd kept in a drawer for 5 years, the kind of ring that shines even in bad light. I forgot what mattered once I said to Christina, I won't forget again. Will you marry me again? She laughed through tears, the good kind, and said yes, while 2 small bodies wrapped themselves around our legs and shouted that they wanted to be ring bearers. Zeus and Apollo too, MJ insisted. Deal, I said. We set the wedding for the beach at sunset, because sometimes you're allowed to be obvious. 2 days before Harrison filed an emergency injunction, claiming duress tried to claw back a deal he'd agreed to with a pen that had his name on it. My mother got quiet, which in our family is the sign that something big is about to happen. The next morning, Harrison walked into his office to find his waiting room full of ghosts that wanted to talk. Claire, yes. His ex, Susan. And a man I recognized from old photos. His brother, Michael. My mother had arranged it not to humiliate but to hold up a mirror. Remember summers when our kids were small, she said, before we turned them into chess pieces. Claire told her father she wouldn't be weaponized anymore. Michael reached out and didn't let go. Sometimes intervention is just love with better grammar. That afternoon, Harrison withdrew the injunction. He announced his retirement. He transferred his shares to Claire. He issued an apology that, I'll be honest, had a little too much polish for my taste, but sometimes you take the step a man can manage and let time do the rest. The beach turned gold. The twins walked the aisle like solemn officials with 2 dogs at their heels. I told the truth in my vows. Christina did too. My mother cried real messy tears, and Mrs. Johnson cried the way saints do when their work is seen in daylight. Thomas and Sophia stood with our family like they'd been in it all along. When the minister said husband and wife, MJ Stage whispered, "That's our mommy and daddy," and everyone laughed for 3 seconds longer than most crowds do because it felt like breathing. We danced under strings of lights. The cake tasted like every birthday I had missed and was somehow forgiven. Later, away from the music, we walked along the water with the boys. Daddy Mike asked, "Are we rich now?" I put him on my shoulders and told him a secret I'm telling you now. We were always rich. We just forgot the currency. He said, like love into my hair. Exactly like that. Satisfying, right? But here's the part that starts the argument. I hope we have in the comments. 2 weeks after the wedding, a group of shareholders filed suit in New York, claiming I'd breached fiduciary duty by choosing family over maximum value creation. Do you think that's fair? That the law measures a father's time against a stock chart, like they're the same kind of Math A morning show called to ask if we'd come talk about blended families and corporate governance, like those topics belong between a pancake recipe and a weather map. A mom at the twins' new school asked Christina if she was the nanny while looking me right in the eye. My mother overheard and pulled that woman aside with a calm I recognized as dangerous. We are not done, not by a long shot. The story doesn't end with a sunset and vows. It ends if it ends with how we decide to treat each other when no one is filming. So here's where I land and where I need you. I gave up a company because I realized it was a costume I didn't need anymore. I used influence to keep reporters away from my kids, and I used influence to help a man face his family. Is that principled, or is that just power playing a different song? Tell me. I chose love and fought like a CEO because that's the only way I know how to fight. Do you think a man who runs a company owes his time to the market more than he owes it to his children? Tell me. When a grandmother admits she was wrong about race and starts doing the right things, do we clap or do we say too late? Tell me. When a mother double-checks a DNA test to protect her sons and then gets painted as manipulative by the same men who demand tests, do we see the hypocrisy or do we call it due diligence? Tell me. I will say this, and I'll say it like a man who has learned to breathe underwater. I do not regret choosing the cafeteria cookie table over the conference table. I do not regret telling a boardroom they could have my shares if they signed away their hands on my children's lives. I do not regret letting the Pacific show me how to float. I look at Mike arguing with MJ about whether skyscrapers can touch the moon, and I look at Christina painting watercolor sunsets with kids who don't know her last name. And I look at my mother reading bedtime stories with different voices, and I think, this is the empire. This is the skyline that matters. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. Now talk to me. If it were you at that window, would you have walked to the boardroom or to the boys? If it were you holding the gavel in that courtroom, would you weigh a father's promise heavier than a stock price? If it were you at that gala, would you have spoken up when someone said the quiet part out loud? Do you think I did the right thing? Or do you think I burned down a house I could have renovated? I want your take, your story, your heat, your nuance. Drop a comment. Push back hard if you need to tell me where you're watching from and what you would have done differently. If this hit you in the chest, hit like so. This conversation finds more people who need it. Share it with someone who is trying to choose between their paycheck and their kids' play. Subscribe. If you want more stories told the way we actually live them, messy and brave and sometimes late, I'll be in the comments. That's a promise. And this time I intend to keep it.